Breaking news from Washington that's sending shockwaves through the technology sector and raising serious questions about America's semiconductor strategy. President Donald Trump just signed a proclamation imposing a 25% tariff on certain advanced computing chips, specifically targeting NVIDIA's H200 AI processor and AMD's MI325X semiconductor. This comes as part of a Section 232 national security investigation that took 9 months to complete. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about protecting American manufacturing. This is about the government taking a cut of lucrative AI chip sales to China while claiming it's about national security. Is this tariff actually going to strengthen American semiconductor production, or is it just a revenue-generating scheme dressed up in national security language? Today, we're breaking down exactly what this tariff means, who it affects, and why the semiconductor industry is holding its breath right now. And we need to talk about what just happened. On Wednesday, January 14th, 2026, President Trump signed a proclamation effective January 15th, imposing a 25% tariff on a narrow category of advanced computing chips under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The specific chips targeted include NVIDIA's H200 AI processor and AMD's MI325X semiconductor, both cutting-edge artificial intelligence chips that represent the pinnacle of American chip design. According to the White House fact sheet released alongside the proclamation, this follows a 9-month investigation by the Commerce Department that concluded imports of semiconductors and their derivative products threaten to impair national security. Let me give you the numbers that matter. The United States currently manufactures only approximately 10% of the chips it requires domestically. We imported roughly $45 billion in semiconductor chips last year, primarily from Taiwan and Malaysia. The proclamation specifically states that America's dependence on foreign sources for semiconductors poses a significant economic and national security risk. And it gets worse. Most of these advanced chips are manufactured by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, in a geopolitically vulnerable region that China has repeatedly threatened. But here's where this gets complicated. The tariff doesn't apply to chips imported for use in U.S. data centers, startups, consumer applications, civil industrial applications, or public sector use. So what does it apply to? Chips that are imported into the United States and then re-exported to other countries, primarily China. This is the critical detail the mainstream media is glossing over. This arrangement stems from a controversial deal Trump announced last August, where he proposed that NVIDIA could sell advanced H200 chips to China if the U.S. government received a 25% cut of the revenue. Legal experts immediately questioned whether this violated the Constitution's prohibition on taxing exports. The administration's solution, a workaround where chips manufactured in Taiwan must make a detour through the United States for third-party testing before being shipped to China. When those chips enter U.S. territory, they become subject to the import tariff. It's a creative legal maneuver that allows the government to collect revenue while technically not taxing exports. And it raises a fundamental question. Is this about national security, or is it about the federal government taking a piece of one of the most profitable industries in the world? Let's break down exactly how this tariff mechanism works, because the details reveal the true nature of this policy. Under the proclamation signed Wednesday, any importer bringing in chips that meet certain performance benchmarks, specifically the NVIDIA H200 and AMD MI325X, will face a 25% ad valorem tariff. That means if a chip is valued at $40,000, the importer pays an additional $10,000 tax. For context, NVIDIA's H200 processors can sell for $30,000 to $40,000 each, and major cloud providers and AI companies order these by the thousands. The proclamation grants Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick broad discretion to apply exemptions. The White House fact sheet specifies that chips won't face the tariff if they're imported for U.S. data centers, which consume the vast majority of AI chips, startups, non-data center consumer applications, non-data center civil industrial applications, or U.S. public sector applications. Read that carefully. The tariff essentially only applies to chips being imported and then re-exported. This is a targeted revenue collection mechanism aimed at one specific transaction: American companies selling advanced AI chips to Chinese customers. Here's the technical background you need to understand. In December 2024, Trump had announced he would impose tariffs on Chinese semiconductor imports over Beijing's unreasonable pursuit of chip industry dominance, but he delayed that action until June 2027. That followed a year-long Section 301 investigation into China's exports of legacy chips to the US, launched by the Biden administration. But last year, Trump abruptly changed course and announced he would allow NVIDIA to sell H200 chips to China in exchange for, and this is his phrase, a cut of the sales. The constitutional problem was obvious. Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution explicitly prohibits taxes or duties on exports. The administration couldn't simply tax NVIDIA when chips left the country, so they engineered this convoluted arrangement. According to a rule issued by the Commerce Department on Tuesday, China-bound H200 chips manufactured in Taiwan must route through the United States for testing by a third-party lab before going to China. When those chips enter U.S. territory, they become imports subject to tariffs, even though they're ultimately destined for China. Think about the logistics of this for a moment. A chip is manufactured in Taiwan, packaged and ready to ship to a customer in China. But instead of taking the direct route, it must be shipped to the United States, go through a testing facility, clear customs while paying a 25% tariff, and then be re-exported to China. This adds shipping costs, time delays, insurance, and administrative complexity to every transaction. One industry analyst told the New York Times this could add 2 to 3 weeks to delivery times and significantly increase the total cost of ownership for Chinese customers. Compare this to a historical precedent. In the 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act imposed sweeping tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods, with rates reaching as high as 60%. Economists widely credit this policy with deepening the Great Depression by triggering a global trade war and collapsing international commerce. While Trump's semiconductor tariff is far more targeted, it represents the same fundamental approach, using tariffs not primarily for national security, but for protectionism and revenue generation. The difference is Trump is being more selective, focusing on a high-value product where America still has design dominance, even if we've lost manufacturing capacity. Here's the cause and effect relationship that should concern every American. The stated goal is to incentivize domestic semiconductor manufacturing and reduce reliance on foreign supply chains, but a 25% tariff on a narrow category of re-exported chips does absolutely nothing to achieve that goal. It doesn't make building a semiconductor fab in Arizona more profitable. It doesn't reduce the cost of the advanced lithography equipment needed to manufacture cutting-edge chips. It doesn't address the reality that building a state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facility costs $20 billion to $40 billion and takes 4 to 5 years. What it does is generate federal revenue while potentially making American chip companies less competitive in the Chinese market. Imagine you design custom furniture in America, but manufacture it in Vietnam, because that's where the skilled craftsmen and affordable workshops are. Now, the government says if you want to sell that furniture to customers in Japan, you have to ship it through Los Angeles first and pay a 25% tax. Does that make you more likely to build a furniture factory in America? No. It makes you less competitive against European and Asian furniture designers who don't face that requirement. That's exactly what's happening with semiconductors. So who actually bears the cost of this policy? Let's break down the impact by category, because the ripple effects extend far beyond NVIDIA and AMD. For the average American household, this tariff won't directly increase the cost of your laptop or smartphone. Remember, chips for consumer products are exempt, But here's what you need to understand. If this tariff makes American chip companies less competitive in the Chinese market, and if China retaliates with its own restrictions on American technology companies, we could see job losses in the semiconductor design sector. NVIDIA employs over 55,000 people in the United States, with an average salary exceeding $150,000. AMD employs approximately 26,000 people globally with significant U.S. operations. These are high-paying engineering jobs in California, Texas, and Oregon. If Chinese customers start buying AI chips from European or Asian competitors instead of American companies, those jobs are at risk. We're talking about positions that support families, fund mortgages, and drive local economies in tech hubs. The exemption for startups sounds generous until you read the fine print. Commerce Secretary Lutnick has broad discretion to determine what qualifies. If you're a small AI company building applications that require advanced computing power, you're dependent on the Commerce Department's judgment about whether your use case qualifies for an exemption. That uncertainty is toxic for business planning. One AI startup founder in San Francisco told reporters he's concerned about whether his company's planned expansion into Asian markets might trigger tariff obligations if they need to move computing resources across borders. The lack of clear guidelines creates a compliance nightmare for small businesses that don't have teams of trade lawyers. Here's where it gets interesting. NVIDIA's stock initially traded slightly lower in after-hours trading following the announcement, dropping about 1.2% before recovering. AMD saw a similar pattern, but here's the kicker. Despite the tariff announcement, NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel stocks have risen 39%, 92%, and 153% respectively over the past year. The market seems to be interpreting this as a best-case scenario, a narrow tariff that doesn't significantly impact the core business. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang has become one of Trump's closest allies in the tech world, and many analysts believe this limited tariff is the result of intense lobbying by major chip companies who feared something much worse. But there's a darker scenario playing out. If Chinese customers decide the tariff, shipping delays, and compliance complexity aren't worth it, they may accelerate their own domestic chip development or buy from companies in South Korea, Japan, or Europe that don't face these restrictions. China is already investing over $100 billion in semiconductor self-sufficiency. This tariff may be the final push they need to break their dependence on American chip design. South Korea and Taiwan are watching this very carefully. According to reports this morning, South Korea's Ministry of Trade is continuing to monitor the situation and has convened emergency meetings with Samsung and SK Hynix. Taiwan's government has been notably quiet, but TSMC, which manufactures the chips being taxed, is caught in an impossible position. They're being told to route chips through a more expensive, time-consuming process that makes their American customers less competitive. The European Union issued a statement expressing concern about unilateral trade measures that may disrupt global semiconductor supply chains. Translation: they're worried this is the beginning of a broader tariff regime that could fragment the global chip industry. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry released data showing that semiconductor equipment exports to the U.S. increased 23% last year, and they're concerned Trump's near-future threat of broader semiconductor tariffs could devastate that trade. Let's look at what experts are actually saying about this policy, because the analysis ranges from cautious to alarmed. Peter Harrell, a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, who served on President Biden's National Security Council staff, said, "This will do absolutely nothing to create an incentive for U.S. manufacturing and seems to be designed solely to create a legal mechanism to tax NVIDIA sales to China." That's a former national security official stating plainly that this isn't a national security measure, it's a revenue grab. The Semiconductor Industry Association, which represents major U.S. chip companies, released a carefully worded statement saying they appreciate the administration's recognition that broad tariffs on semiconductors would harm American competitiveness, but expressed concern about the uncertainty surrounding future tariff expansions. Reading between the lines, they're relieved this wasn't worse, but worried about what comes next. One trade economist at a major university told Reuters that the constitutional workaround routing chips through the U.S. to convert an export tax into an import tariff is legally creative, but economically absurd. The added logistics, costs, delays, and compliance burden could easily exceed the tariff itself for some transactions. If you're a Chinese AI company deciding whether to buy 1,000 NVIDIA H200 chips or wait 6 months for a domestic alternative, these friction costs might tip the decision. The key legal implication here extends beyond semiconductors. If this tariff structure is upheld by courts, and it's likely to be challenged, it establishes a precedent for the federal government to effectively tax exports by requiring them to route through U.S. territory first. That could be applied to pharmaceuticals, aerospace components, or any other high-value manufactured good where the U.S. has design leadership but offshore manufacturing. Politically, this puts Democrats in an awkward position. Many supported the Biden administration's CHIPS Act, which allocated $52 billion in subsidies to encourage domestic semiconductor manufacturing. That's the carrot approach. Pay companies to build fabs in America. Trump's tariff is the stick approach. Penalize companies that don't. But Democrats can't easily criticize tariffs on semiconductors without appearing soft on China. Republicans, meanwhile, are split. Free market conservatives hate tariffs on principle, but populist Republicans see this as fulfilling Trump's promise to get tough on trade with China. In the short term, the next 30 to 90 days, watch for two things. First, legal challenges. Constitutional scholars are already questioning the export-to-import conversion scheme. Second, watch China's response. If Beijing issues retaliatory restrictions on American tech companies operating in China, or if they announce accelerated funding for domestic chip development, we'll know this tariff backfired. Medium term, over the next 6 to 12 months, the real test is whether any major chip company announces new U.S. manufacturing capacity as a result of this policy. If they don't, we'll have our answer. This was about revenue, not national security. Let's recap the three most critical points. First, Trump imposed a 25% tariff on advanced AI chips, like NVIDIA's H200 and AMD's MI325X. Effective January 15th, but only on chips that are imported and then re-exported, primarily to China. Second, this appears designed to generate federal revenue from AI chip sales to China rather than actually incentivize domestic manufacturing, according to multiple policy experts. Third, the tariff could make American chip companies less competitive globally while doing nothing to address the fact that we manufacture only 10% of the chips we need. Here's the key takeaway. When a policy claims to be about national security, but is structured to generate revenue without actually solving the underlying vulnerability, you have to question the real motivation. America's dependence on Taiwan for advanced chip manufacturing is a genuine national security risk. A narrow tariff on re-exported chips doesn't solve that problem. So here's my question for you. Do you think this tariff will actually bring semiconductor manufacturing back to America, or is this just another example of using national security as cover for protectionist trade policy? Let me know in the comments what you think is really going on here. If you want to stay informed on stories the mainstream media won't fully cover, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. The semiconductor industry is the foundation of modern economic and military power, and what happens next will determine whether America leads or follows in the technology race. In an era where AI chips are as strategic as oil or steel once were, we can't afford policies that sound tough but accomplish nothing. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.